Hello and welcome to Economic Divide with me, Kabat Tahwai. Just a couple of weeks ago, we covered the 10-year war anniversary of the war on Syria. Now it's time to cover another brutal U.S.-backed war, and that is the war on Yemen. It is now 6 years old. This is what Yemen's economy looked like before the war. From the year 2000, we took a look up until the year 2018. As you can see, the economy was actually not doing that bad. It had a GDP growth of between 6 to 8%. But you can see the dip there. That is when the war broke out, roughly around the year 2014, and it went all the way down to minus 28%. Pretty bad. I mean, this actually is a brutal war. Bombs are doing the killing on both the civilians and the economy. But the country itself actually, before the war began, was not doing well. It was a poor country. Living on less than $2 a day accounted for 45% of the population. 33% living on less than $1 a day. So you can see that this country was affected deeply by poverty. Okay, it is no surprise then that this kind of devastation, the war that the country has been inflicted on the country, well, there are many aspects of the economy that have grinded to a halt as a result. One common denominator that reflects the dire straits of the economy is the collapse of the Yemeni rial, the focus of our next report.
Cashiers sort through large stacks of money. This is Yemen's central bank. It has become another front line in this war. The bank's headquarters was moved from the capital Sana'a in the year 2016. The government not recognized by the Yemenis accused the legitimate government of Yemen, the National Salvation Government, that it was using its resources to finance the war. But this was just another effort by the Saudis and its allies to squeeze the Yemenis.
ودائع إضافية حصلنا عليها أو يعود بالحصول عليها من مصادر من خلال حوار أو مناقشات دارت مع الدول الشقيقة المانحة. أتصور اثنين كانت من دولة الإمارات تقريبا تعاهدت أو وعدت بتسليمها، وكذلك دولة الكويت مليار أخرى 3 مليار. بالتأكيد هذه سترفض وتعزز إمكانيات البنك المركزي للوفاء بكثير من التزاماته كما فعلت.
ارتفاع الأسعار ارتفاع أسعار قانونية جدا. طبعا المواطن فين عاد يروح بعد الأسعار هذه؟ والشرعية حقا احنا يعني ما عملوش أي حل من ناحية ارتفاع الأسعار، من ناحية ارتفاع العملة تنهار. ضروري نشتي حل العملة.
The relocation of the bank made the situation worse since it divided the country.
زال هناك أمل كبير جدا في إعادة تصحيح مسار الثورة اليمنية من جديد وتحقيق التغيير الشامل في اليمن، ولكن هذا يتطلب جهود كبيرة جدا كون اليمن الآن منقسم بشكل كبير جدا، دولة يقودها الحوثيون في الشمال ودولة في الجنوب.
As one analyst put it, it left the country with two parallel centers of fiscal policy dealing with one currency.
منذ فترة طويلة قاربت الوديعة السعودية المقدرة بملياري دولار في البنك المركزي الرئيسي على النفاذ، وليس هناك بدائل من مصادر النقد الأجنبي التي استنزفت خلال السنوات الأخيرة من الحرب.
Time to begin our first guest of today's show. Her name is Judith Brown, and she is the former manager at UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. She was the manager at Refugee Health Project in Yemen until the year 2001, and she also has a Facebook page on Yemen, which is good to see. Judith, welcome. The destruction of Yemen is something that is truly devastating and shocking. When we take a look at the way that the Saudi bombing campaign has happened for 6 years, I mean, this country was a poor country to begin with, and you have an economy that's in tatters. And the bombing campaign is said to have targeted vital infrastructure, which is my focus on this question, roads and hospitals, for example. Was that done with the aim of actually destroying the economy so that the people would rise up against the National Salvation Government there, do you think?
I think that one has to say that the Yemen economy has been targeted in many ways from the beginning, not only by bombing campaign, but by the embargo by the movement of banks, by restriction of money in North Yemen. And yes, it has. In fact, I think one of the things that you didn't mention is its particular attack on the agricultural industry, everything to do with it, markets, farms, animal, livestock, warehouses, factories that produced food. They've all been targeted by the Saudi campaign, and that's been quite well documented. And certainly it has had the result of Yemen's economy being totally destroyed. I think that, was it on purpose? I think my own feeling is that that was a target, because I think that modern warfare doesn't aim to necessarily win wars, but to destroy companies and keep those countries in a perpetual state of war.
Indeed, that could be the case. Thank you, Judith. We're going to definitely come back to you a little later in this program. Well, it's time to take a look at our second report of this program, which takes a look at one of the consequences of this war, food insecurity and its impact on the national economy.
A hungry child, malnourished due to prolonged lack of food. Shortages of water.
Central bank is out of money. The price of the basic food basket, the things you need as a family in order to survive, has increased by 30% in just the past few weeks alone, and it's continuing to increase. These are the same sets of factors that drove the country to the brink of famine 18 months ago.
The world has failed the Yemeni people.
Now, to seize this chance to revitalize the political process that we now hope we can see in front of us.
But the will of the Yemenis is still there, as they welcome the holy month of Ramadan. Sana'a residents seen here said they gave the Muslim holy month a great reception.
والله الاستقبال شهر رمضان شهر كريم ويكون استقبال رائع في الشعب اليمني بالرغم من العدوان والحصار البترول او النفط او كل هذا، لكن كل الشعب اليمني لا زال يعني حي قوي، لازم يكافئ وصبر على ذلك.
الناس في هذه الايام يعانون معانا كثيره يعني من اجل لقمه العيش، والسبب هذا يرجع الى العدوان.
People have flocked to the supermarkets for their Ramadan needs.
رغم هذا الظروف الذي بيمر فيها الشعب اليمني، رغم هذه المعاناة التي يعاني منها المجتمع اليمني، وخاصة في هذا الوضع الحصار وهذا الحرب وهذه أرى أن النسبة عملية العرض وعملية الشراء هناك في تناسب ما بين العام الماضي وهذا العام.
طبعا العدوان على بلادنا قبل يعني 6 سنوات أو 7 سنوات أثر على الجانب الاقتصادي. طبعا الناس ما بيستلموش رواتب إلى الآن، كلها بسبب العدوان. فهذا يعني إيش أدى إلى أنه إيش تقريبا يمكن 18 مليون تحت خط الفقر. فهذه يعني كارثة، مصيبة.
However, not all Yemenis are as lucky as these seen in the legitimate capital Sana'a, run by the National Salvation Government. Yemenis see them as the legitimate governing body of the country. They have pledged a commitment to them.
حصير على الشعب اليمني وحصير على الذي في منازلهم، لن يوجد معهم غاز، لن يوجد معهم أي شيء. تشوف الناس في منازلهم ميتون من الجوع من قلة الغاز. لماذا الحصار على اليمن؟ لماذا هذا كله على اليمن؟ ما هو الدافع؟
Our guest for this section is Mia Shua. She earned her PhD in political economy from the University of Sydney and has written many articles, one of them titled Revisiting Neoliberalism and Democracy in a Time of Crisis. Mia, welcome to the program. Yemen is said to be so broken that it can never be put back together again. Take the Yemen Central Bank, for example, split into two by the self-proclaimed president of Yemen, Abraham Mansur Hadi. That's resulted in trades at one rate in the National Salvation Government-controlled capital like Sana'a, and then another rate in STC-controlled Aden. That's the Southern Transitional Council. Basically, this seems to be an effort to break the country into two parts. Is that what the aim is?
Yeah, Yeah, the fragmentation of state institutions is an unfortunate but expected outcome of this ruthless war. You could argue that the government's efforts to hold on to power and suffocate the Houthi movement at all costs has perpetuated this fragmentation and intensified it. The relocation of the bank is part of a government plan to bring the banking system in Yemen under its control and deprive the Houthis of millions of dollars acquired from taxes from Sana'a-based banks and mobile operators. The president's move sparked an economic war between the two banks as the Houthis refused to pay salaries of public servants in areas under their control and banned banknotes printed by the Yemeni government in Aden. It was said that the cuts in salaries had a severe economic toll. However, despite the Yemeni government efforts to control the exchange system, the Yemeni rial on Thursday moved towards a new record low in the government-controlled areas.
Okay, thank you, Mia. That's Mia Shua with her thoughts there. It's time to take a break here on Economic Divide, but don't go anywhere as we have plenty more coming up, so stay right where you are. Let's welcome back guest Judith Brown, the former manager at UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Judith, we're going to take a look at the port city of Aden and my question here, which is under Saudi Emirati siege, not letting the flow of goods freely into the country. The Saudis and its allies, they are not capable of winning this war. Why don't they settle for a political solution instead of destroying the country, placing a siege on Aden and continuing this war in which they are not only losing, but they're choking the economy as a result?
Well, I think that one of the things is that powers outside Yemen don't seem to want Yemen to end the war. Certainly, I think that when Trump was in power, he saw the possibility of selling a lot of weapons to Saudi Arabia. Biden came in making a grand statement that he was going to return Yemen to peace, but in fact has done absolutely nothing except return the situation back to the same situation as Obama, i.e. he's not selling precision weapons and he's talking about ceasefires, he's talking about peace talks, none of which have happened, and I can't see that they're going to happen. I know that a lot of people in the north of Yemen, they say to me that this is a proxy war in as much as Saudi Arabia is fighting on behalf of UK and USA. I think there's a lot of truth in that, in as much as I think that the powers outside Yemen seem to have their own interests in keeping wars going across the whole of the Middle East, and keeping those countries destabilized for whatever reason, I'm not sure. But instability is a feature of war at the moment, wars without end that seem to go on forever. And I don't think that the situation is one where there seems to be any urgency in the Biden camp, apart from making a statement, one of his first statements that he made when he first came to office. There doesn't seem to be any urgency in him implementing anything that's likely to create peace. And of course, ironically, one of the ways that you could stop outside parties from interfering in Yemen is by stopping the sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia and UAE that are perpetuating the war in Yemen.
All right, that's Judith Brown there with her thoughts. Now let's go to the port city of Aden, which I mentioned, and see how Yemenis are actually faring there, because Aden is a port city. It should be doing okay, but the Saudis and the Emiratis have placed an embargo on that city.
The port city of Aden, key in the distribution of goods to the entire country. Maybe one reason why the UAE and Saudi Arabia placed a blockade on the country. Even that coalition failed, called a war within a war. a reported five-fold spike in deaths started the year 2021. Reasons? From COVID-19 to a variety of diseases, including hunger and cholera.
والنظام الصحي بشكل عام في الجنوب يحتاج لتدخل المنظمات الدولية ومنظمة الصحة العالمية لتقديم الدعم اللازم لمواجهة هذه الجائحة.
This is one way Yemenis are making a living, transporting goods through donkeys.
يعني زي ما عندي أنا 9 عيال، من فين أكلهم؟ من فين أشربهم؟ يعني زي حتى كمان عندك الراشان غالي، هذا غالي، كل شيء غالي، من فين تعيش؟ وإذا رحت دورت وظيفة من فين دول بياكلوا ويشربوا؟ يعني اضطريت للحمار، هذا بفضل الله ثم بالحمار هذا رزق موفر، كل شيء موفر.
But food shortages, a sharp depreciation of the currency, and a lack of funds to pay public sector employees have plagued the port city.
الأسعار بالنار الحمراء. رواتب كان أول تنزل الآن معبش. الوضع متدهور. كل البلاد من أسوأ إلى أسوأ منه. ما عاد شي حاجة. كل يعني صم نظر وفطر نظر، ما عاد يحتاج كلامي ولا كلام أي صحفي ولا كلام أي متعلم. الوضع يعني معروف.
ولا بالنسبة لارتفاع الغلاء ما نقدر نتحمل، يعني رواتبنا كم ما يكون فيها إيجار وفيها يعني أسعار مرتفعة وإيجارة بيت ومصاريف وضع ما نقدر نتحمل أكثر من كذا يعني.
نحن نشي نرجع الصرف زي ما كان. الدبة البترول تواصلت ل 12,000، الدبة الصليد اللي كنا ناخدها ب 3,000 تواصلت ل 12,000، السكر، الرز اللي راتبها 25 قرش ياكلها قرش يشربها. في ناس داخل البيوت بلا اكل بلا شرب، بلا غش حق الايجارات حق البيوت طلعت ايجارتها بالدولار بالريال السعودي.
It's time now for an in-depth section of this program. We're going to take a look at the numbers coming out of war-battered Yemen, which couldn't be more shocking, really. First, let's take a look at the population in that country. This is not a shock. The population has risen to 29.16 million, a little less than 30 million. Of course, there's been 300, 400, 500,000 maybe to have been killed as a result of the war. Now, in terms of the number of Yemenis that need urgent help, that amounts to 9.8 million. A little less than 10 million. Obviously, many Yemenis need basic health care, something that they can't have access to because of the bombing campaign that's happening. That number is 14.8 million people. That's almost half of the population, to put that into context for you. Now, as of April 12th, this is what Martin Griffiths, the UN Special Envoy for the country, has said, practically begging for the warring parties to seize opportunity for peace in the country.
The war in Yemen has lasted over 6 years. In these 6 years, Yemenis have increasingly and appallingly lacked access to food and medicine. More than 6 years with no basic services, with restriction of movement in and around and out of the country, and over 6 years of the children of Yemen being deprived of schooling and being deprived of their future. A generation has been lost.
Yeah, a generation lost indeed. Of course, you may be lost as a result of all the numbers that we are throwing at you. So let's do this. I want to put things into context for you and tell you, what if Yemen was 100 people? 100 people. And out of that, give you numbers out of 100 people as to the situation in Yemen. For example, the first item that we're going to take a look at would be humanitarian assistance, to make it simple. Out of each 100 people in Yemen, 74 would need humanitarian aid, out of 100 people. Moving now next to having no access to clean water or sanitation services. The number of people that are in need of that are 57 out of 100. So you can see how severe these numbers are. Now, the next item that we're going to take a look at are people in Yemen who are food insecure and are at risk of famine. Here the number stands at 60 out of every 100 person in Yemen. Of course, these numbers again are very shocking to put things into context for you. The next number is another shocking number when it comes to women. 10 of the women and children in Yemen are acutely malnourished. These numbers, such as this one, could actually now be more because the war is still ongoing. And finally, we're going to take a look at the figure that drove home the devastation of this war. You heard of the phrase in Yemen, how a child dies every 10 minutes. Why is a child dying every 10 minutes? The reason cited: malnutrition, diarrhea, and breathing infections. Now, does that give you a better idea? I hope so. Well, here is UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric on his latest look at the grave economic and humanitarian situation in that country.
Moving on to Yemen, our colleagues there tell us that the humanitarian situation continues to worsen, with fuel and food prices at double or even triple the pre-conflict averages, and the depreciation of the Yemeni rial. The threat of hunger for millions is a reality.
Stefan Dujarric there, the UN spokesperson who took a look at the grave economic situation in that country, not to mention, of course, the humanitarian situation. Now we're going to bring in Mia Shua to get an analysis on that. Mia, welcome back. You are aware of the importance of Aden. So has Saudi Arabia and the UAE. They've set up a legitimate government there in their eyes. And we know that Aden is very important because most, if not all, goods that come through the country have to get distributed from there. But it's placed under a siege. What is your assessment of the situation of Aden and the embargo that both the Saudis and the Emiratis have placed there?
Yes, Saudi and its allies have the budget and the will to continue their campaign against a politically and economically independent Yemen. Aside from this, there is also the issue of Yemen's position at the gate of the Red Sea, a channel for Saudi exports and trade. Saudi is threatened by the idea of having a potentially powerful state on their southern border and controlling, maybe even policing, the Red Sea. This scenario would see Yemen carry a lot of leverage against their current aggressor. From this perspective, the Saudi coalition may prefer to continue their brutal campaign rather than face this difficult outcome of Yemeni control in the Red Sea.
Okay, thank you, Mia, for that. We do appreciate that. Now, we can cover the humanitarian figures of this war at length, but we also need to get a feel of some of the economic indicators which also show how bad the economy is doing. Now, let's first take a look at how much money the country has lost in terms of its oil revenues. $75 billion is the figure that we have as of the latest figure for the loss of oil revenue. That figure, again, could be higher. The GDP is the next item. The cumulative GDP percentage contraction in real GDP terms came in at a whopping minus 50% for the year 2020. So half of the country's GDP to have been lost there. What does all of this translate into when it comes to economic loss as a whole? That's $88.8 billion.
أعيد إيرادات بلدنا لبنكنا ولم أقل تعودوه لي ولكن عيدوه إلى بنكنا البنك الذي سلم المرتبات في كل الشهور التي كان يدير فيها.
The war in Yemen has battered the economy there for 6 years, and it doesn't seem like it's going to stop anytime soon. What has fueled this war has been weapons, military equipment, sold mainly by the U.S. to Saudi Arabia and its allies. That has kept the war going on for 6 years now. But did you ever wonder why the war continues? Even though Saudi Arabia and its allies continue to lose on the ground, like multiple attacks by the Yemeni army on Saudi's moneymaker Aramco and other military advances by the Yemeni army? Well, the reason is simple. Saudi Arabia is losing the war. It's spending a lot of money at it too. And the Yemeni army wants to have a strong hand when it comes to the negotiations. That is why the Yemeni army is fighting to capture Ma'arib. That is the biggest district by area. Don't forget, the Saudis just recently offered a peace plan. It was rejected by the National Salvation Government because, well, it did not put an end to the blockade, which was a key demand of the government. The U.S. support, once it ends, will wrap up the war. No doubt about that. But the question is there a strong enough will by the U.S. to give its order to Saudi Arabia to end the war? That does it for this edition of Economic Divide. Thanks for tuning in. Send us your questions and comments. We do appreciate them. From me, the entire team, it's goodbye until next time.